Hello everyone, welcome to Manifest IAS, and we'll be discussing the ethics questions which has come in the GS4 paper, that is ethics paper, in the Civil Services Mains Examination 2020. Prior to this, we have discussed all the papers like General Essay paper, paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, and in paper 4, already we have discussed the case studies part of this ethics paper. So now we'll be discussing with the questions. So in this, there are totally 13 questions and there are 6 main questions. Under first 5 main questions, there are 2 sub questions each. Then in the 6th question, quote-based questions, there are 3 sub questions or 3 quotes have been given. So I'll be discussing the first 4 questions, that is 1A, 1B, 2A and 2B. And the subsequent questions will be discussed by Umesh sir and Ayush sir. So let us go through the questions. So before going to the questions, just I want to brief you about the strategy, how you have to handle the ethics paper. So here basically the reading time that is allocated for the whole paper will be around half an hour, because case studies will be page long case studies and you need to spend at least 30 minutes in reading the paper. So for solving 250 marks, you'll be having only 2.5 hours. So 2.5 hours means like 1 hour 100 marks. So that roughly comes to like 10 marker for around 5 marks, or 10 marker is equal to 6 minutes. So in the starting only you have to show some hurriedness. So that is why in the first section, that is in the theory questions, you have to show some hurriedness and you have to try to solve within 5 to 6 minutes. Within 5 to 6 minutes, you have to wind up each question. So that is how you have to strategize. Then definitely you have to blend with very confident questions and moderate level of questions. First you have to attend the confident questions, then you have to go to the moderate level of questions. So finally you have to give a very presentable paper and a complete paper to the evaluator. So let us go through question 1. So in question 1, this question is pertaining to the international relations. So in international relations, a country's dignity or the country's reputation matters a lot. So while we call any country as like comprehensive national power, so it has to have 3 ingredients intact. So first one is the human capital, second one is soft power, and the social harmony. So with this, we can easily correlate all these things to the India's comprehensive national power. So India is emerging as one of the global leaders, and when it comes to the different aspects of this CNP, like we have to examine like with respect to human capital, with respect to the social harmony, and with respect to the soft power, how India is exhibiting, that we need to discuss. But this question is not asking particular to India, but we can quote India's context in this question. So first of all, human capital. How human capital is driven by the ethics and values. So ethics and values, so basically they define the human nature or the very existence of the human beings. So here the distinguishing factor from human beings to the other animals we need to exhibit. So here we need to incorporate like the policies in the country or in the nation for the empowerment for all. So in this, all the sections of society will come, maybe gender-based, maybe the right-based approach. So we need to accommodate. So like that, we have one example as gender budgeting, or with respect to many affirmative actions that we do. So that will inculcate the ethics and values for our human capital. Then enhancing the cognition in humans. So maybe it is through the education system or maybe it is through the value system. We tend to build the cognitive abilities of the human beings. Through that, we can easily distinguish in the decisions made by the human beings. They are unlike the decisions made by the computers or the machines. So we are building humans, not creating machines. And as Vivekananda told, education is the manifestation of the man that is already inside. So that is what we need to do through our value systems. Then humans with right attitude, aptitude, and emotional intelligence, which is very much required. And when we say human capital, it is about the health, it is about education, and it is about the skill at the end. So here, like, we are inculcating everything in the person. Maybe we are building the ethical human being, we are building a healthy human being, we are building a educated human being, and we are building a skilled human being. For that, ethics and values are the basic components. Then, as I told earlier, Vivekananda has been about education. Through our education system, we are building the human capitals. And country to country, the human capital value that changes. But as India, like, as far as the human capital is concerned, we need to do a lot in these fields. That is health, education, and skill. But this question should not go in that way. We have to inculcate a lot of ethical values so that our human capital will be having some worth. Then coming to the soft power, this is with respect to the culture that we cultivate and the policies that we bring into fore. So here there are many inherent things, or what we call as basic Indian values, like sustainability, moderate lifestyle, and the non-aggression. So these are going to define our policies or the nature of the human beings, and this is very much explicit in our foreign policy too. Foreign policies like non-aggression, like Panchashil, mutual coexistence, NAM, like distancing ourselves from two power blocks, and there are many altruistic things that are done by India. For example, the pharmaceutical supply to African countries, development in Middle East, or in the war-torn countries. So there, the India is showing its soft power, which is based upon the ethical values. So here, when it comes to the policies like world peace, yes, we support for disarmament, we support for world peace, and as I told, like, no coercion or mutual coexistence. And also in the case of vaccines, like, we are supplying, or we are already having some MOUs or the agreements between many countries for supplying the COVID vaccines. So that shows our culture and our policies which are based on ethical values. Then coming to social harmony, India is one of the world leaders, especially as in the field of spiritualism. India is exhibiting a lot. So definitely this spiritualism is based off our ethical values. So through this, we preach many things like non-violence, which is ahimsa. Then the Sarvadharma Samanvaya, that is like existence of almost all religions in the world. So that thing we exhibit. And the Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the universal man, or this whole globe is one family. That is what we preach to the world. So like this, we are going to build the society where, like, there is no communalism seen, where no regionalism seen, or there is no casteism seen, and all the different parts of the society or different divisions in the society are coexisting, and that too with harmony. This is what our the national power or the comprehensive national power is all about, and the ingredients are based upon the ethical values. The next question is with respect to the National Education Policy 2020. It is a very long term, or like a vision document, or it has many ingredients. Maybe it is with respect to reorientation and restructuring of the education system in India, or it is with respect to accessibility, or it is with respect to quality, or it is with respect to equitability. Like, this is one of the comprehensive policy that we have in India. So through this, like, they are asking, like, how education is not an injunction, and it is the effective pervasive tool for all-round development and also for the social transformation. First of all, we have to explain how it is not injunction. Injunction, it is nothing but an obstruction. So the education should not become obstruction. In our education system earlier, like, we find many obstructions, like there is a detention policy, like for example, a child, if it is not able to clear certain standards, then it will be retained in the previous standard. Then with respect to our orientation, towards the exam system. So we didn't have much credit system earlier, and with respect to the outcome of the education, so it was basically the job orientation, or there was a differentiation between the nature of the jobs. So all these things like were part of the earlier this thing, but the new curriculum or the new education policy which is brought recently, so that is trying to cut this obstruction. So it is no more injunction, and the supporting points are the curriculum flexibility. So the student or the ward can like choose, or it can have the flexible approach towards the curriculum. That is one thing that has been brought up. And with respect to credit system, as I told, like credit system was like a punishing thing. No credit system was like a punishing thing. There was no rewarding aspect of that. So here the credit system will bring a lot of flexibility in the means of learning. Then when it comes to the assessment, so earlier that there was a strict assessment, or either it is fail or pass, like that. So here we have a comprehensive and continuous evaluation right now, which is regular and the formative assessment. It is not a breaking, or it is not a destructive assessment. It is kind of a formative assessment that we have. Through this, we are proving that the present NEP 2020 is not an injunction on learning. And with respect to the all-round development, so the NEP 2020 is stressing upon the mother tongue. So along with that, the multilingualism is stressing about, and even with respect to the vernacular languages, it is giving emphasis. So here it will give a lot of flexibility, and the overall development of a child, or the all-round development of a child, is enhanced through the basic learning in the mother tongue. And when it comes to the second point, our education system is not just orienting towards some professional courses or degrees, or towards only some professions. So right from the beginning, there is an aspect of vocational training, so where the child will be learning as far as the knowledge acquisition is concerned, and also as far as the livelihood options are concerned, or as far as the entrepreneurship is concerned. So the vocational training is part of this, and there is a a blend of many things. Now there is no separation between arts and science. So there is no strict demarcation, and between curricular and extracurricular, there is no demarcation. And also with occasional and academic streams, there is no demarcation. So it is the blend of all these things. So that is why it is very helpful for the all-round development of a child. So that is how it is proved. Coming to the social transformation. So social transformation is what? Mainstreaming many parts of our society, and it is also about bringing them to the fore, or it is doing the affirmative action towards those sections of the society. So here we are doing the inclusion of gender wise by setting the gender inclusion fund, and also there are special education zones for the disadvantaged regions and the groups. So it is not just about the communities, it is also about the regions. We are identifying those regions and the groups for giving the special attention. Then with respect to the cross disability training, so there is a support of educators for the cross disability training. So even the specially abled or the Vikalang people, so they have a lot of benefits, or they have a lot of allocation as far as the NEP 2020 is concerned. And coming to the other aspects like Bal Bhavan, so this is the special day boarding schools for the dropout children. So dropout children, usually for meeting their livelihood options or for their food security, they drop out. But when we provide the boarding facilities for them, then definitely they will enroll themselves. So that is how the social transformation is happening. There are a lot of points here as far as the social transformation or the overall development of a child. But as far as the marks are concerned, we have to restrict it to 10 marks or 150 words. So here explanation of 8 to 9 proper points would suffice our purpose. Next question is about like the hatred. Hatred, it is a negative attitude, or this is a negative value. So it is not given the priority anywhere, because the love is the basic principle of nature, and whatever that is against love, that will go against the nature. So that is why the hatred is the negative attribute, and this is against the nature, because all the religions are built upon love and affection. So that is why hatred is the negative attitude. That is what we have to tell. And how it is destructive. How it is destructive. So when a person is trying to hate someone, logic or the cognitive ability of that person will take the back seat, because the anger or the negative attributes of intolerance, so many things will come to the fore. Then the person will not be logical, the person will turn completely emotional. Emotional is not negative always, but extreme emotional or like hating someone to the extreme, so that would make the person blind. So here again, Gandhiji's quote can be invoked like, the eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. So that can be used here. And the best example what we can give is the character of Duryodhana in the epic Mahabharata. So the hatred against the Pandavas made him blind, and even what all the bravery or the like the courage or the skills what he had, they did not come of use to him because of that hatred, because that hatred was kind of a wheel before him, which tend to the destruction of the self. Then when it comes to the destruction of conscience, so as I talked earlier, the logic will take the backseat and the emotions will come in front. So in such cases, if our emotions and our cognitive abilities are not balanced, then definitely we tend to make a lot of wrong decisions. So when we make the wrong decisions, our conscience will be pricking, because that is the highest court that we have. That is the internal court what we have. It tells about right or wrong. So when we give the like the decision making tool in the hands of emotions, we tend to make the unbalanced judgment, or we may tend to make some extremities or some valences. So here the person who disregard the conscience or who practice hatredness, he thinks that he is above all values or he is above everything. So that is where the destruction starts. Then the actions are mainly based upon the emotions. Again, as I told, there should be proper blend of emotions and the cognitive ability to make the right decisions. For example, the mindless violence made by the terrorists. So here, this is a proper, like the defeat of the conscience. So here the hatred is all over, and when that hatred wheel comes, so the person becomes blind. So for all the violences that we have in the world, maybe in the modern period or in the ancient period, it is all because of that hatredness. Then here the ends will justify the means. So finally, like you have to destruct one person, but you will justify its destruction and the mode that you adopted just depending upon the result that you have got. But here in destructing someone, indirectly you are destructing yourself. For example, the after effects of the Kalinga War, which had on Ashoka. So Kalinga War, like it was kind of an enlightenment for him. So he dropped violence, he dropped hatredness, and he became saint person. So that is how the people got enlightened and they shunned hatredness. Then coming to the poisons in national spirit. So here, this is not good for even the national level or at the policy making level or something. So if you look at some countries, like usually the majoritarian people have got the all the benefits, and those majoritarian people tend to become intolerant towards the other sections of the society. That is the modern phenomena that we are seeing. Maybe the cause of World War II, that is basically depending upon the hatred towards certain communities. So that is what we have seen in Germany. So like that, the policies will be based on intolerance. So intolerance will come to the fore, and that will define the policies. And when it comes to like the growth of certain sections of the society, they will grow disproportionately or they will grow very powerful at the cost of other minorities. So here the minorities' voice will be completely neglected, or the minorities will not be given any priority. So that is very wrong for the nation, because every nation is made of, like different, like social fabric or the religious fabric. So it is not a uniformity which we have to bring. It is all about the unity that we have to bring in. So even the hatred nets towards certain sections, towards certain regions, will lead to the spoiling of that country, or the image of that country at the international level that will fall down. So this is what we have to address in the question. Then 2B, question 2B, what are the main components of emotional intelligence? This is a straight question, and can they be learned? So here you can take any stand, but as far as the attitude formation is concerned, and as far as the emotional intelligence is concerned, it can always be learned. So here I have made certain like divisions, like what are the components and how they can be learned. So first one is the self-awareness. It is about knowing our emotions. Knowing our emotions means like at what time or at what moment or at what situation, like what is our emotion. So we should be having clear-cut idea about our emotions. So that will help us to regulate ourselves and use our emotions for the betterment of others or betterment of the whole society. For civil servant, it is very much necessary. How we can cultivate this self-awareness? So basically through conditioning or the observation or through meditation. So in our Indian value system, we have a lot of like exercises physically or mentally to make ourselves aware or to know our emotions, especially the meditations like Upasana and all, like that will help a lot in knowing our emotions. Then coming to self-regulation. So self-regulation, it is about mending yourself or refraining yourself from the extremes. So that can be done by building the ethical conscience. Again, there are many practices, there are many psychological exercises for doing this. So self-regulation, like it will come only after you know about your emotions. So then only you can mend your emotions. Then with respect to motivation, so through this you are motivating others or motivating yourself. So that will happen by seeing the role models or having the proper desire or proper achievement drive. So like what exactly you want to do and what is the objective. So that will drive you through, and that is the source of motivation. And sometimes the rewarding or sometimes the incentivizing, all these things can be used to drive the motivation. Then coming to empathy, it is about like being in other shoes and empathizing or like knowing what exactly they are feeling. So that will come through the observation and that will come through the experiences. So experiences are the main, like hallmarks to learn like empathy or to cultivate compassion in oneself. The first-hand experience are very important. So through this we can learn. And coming to the final thing, that is the social skills that we need. That is nothing but the interpersonal skills that we need to like regulate others' emotions or using their emotions and your emotions for the final objectivity. So here, like we can practice that being in public interface or by interacting with many people or making ourselves into or like taking ourselves into some difficult situations or some kind of exercises or group activities. So we will definitely learn the social skills. So even our service training, all those things that will help us to cultivate the social skills. So these are the first 4 questions that I wanted to discuss. The other 9 questions will be discussed by Umesh sir and Ayush sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrityunjay sir, for discussing the first 4 questions in the ethics paper. Now, today I am going to discuss the next 4 questions in ethics. Okay, 4 to 5 questions, which are more or less from the sections like history, international relations, okay, and the ethics involved along with them. Okay, that is the section that I'm going to take up. Yesterday we have done the case study discussion too. Okay, today we are going to wind up this thing. Okay, and when it comes to the questions which I'm going to discuss, the first and foremost question was, what are the teachings of Buddha? What teachings of Buddha are most relevant to today and most relevant today and why? Discuss. Okay, this is the question. So what teachings of Buddha are relevant today and why? Okay, so there are two parts to this question. Which teachings are important and why are they important is the second part. Okay, first part is which teachings are important, second part is why are they important. Along with that, okay, so in the introduction you can write about Buddha's spirituality. Okay, Buddha's spirituality in 6th century BC, he emerged as a social reformer. Okay, that introduction you can give, and after that you have to know about some of the good ideas in Buddhism, okay, which can make your answer actually very, very strong. So first and foremost, I have picked up some ideas from Buddhism which I think are important for today's world. Okay, first and foremost is the value of Madhyamika Marga. Okay, in the situation of the world today where there is extreme materialism is taking center stage in the society, so to refrain from extreme materialism, one need to follow this marga called Madhyamika Marga. The middle path, the golden mean which Buddha talks about is Madhyamika Marga. Then after that he also talks about one concept called Shila. Shila is duty-based ethics or conduct-based ethics, okay, wherein he talks about the responsibility of each person to the society around him, to his family members, to his servants. So wherein he talks about, through this concept of Shila, he talks about ethical conduct to counter, okay, and today's problem is what? Corruption is today's one of the major problems, and duty-based life for civil servants and politicians, it will help in curbing corruption. So this section is done. Then the next important value of Buddhism is to shun away from Trishna. Okay, Trishna is extreme form of desire. Okay, and Trishna is the thing which leads to dukkha. So this correctness is something which Buddha talks about. So that's the reason why what we have to do is we should shun away from Trishna, which is extreme form of desire. Okay, and it can help in avoiding all kinds of pain. Okay, it can help in avoiding all kinds of pain. So usually Trishna leads to over anxious, anxiety based performance, which can lead to mental health problems and depression. Okay, these kind of things, which is a mental health problem, is a major problem in mainstream society today. So that's the reason why you should always shun from Trishna. Then the next important idea of Buddha is Atta Dipo Bhava, be your own light. Atta Dipo Bhava. Atta Dipo Bhava means be your own light. So in the current context, when okay, some elements of obscurantism, okay, some element of godman is dominating the society, okay, being your own light, being reasonable, okay, following your own path is something which is very, very important, and this is against rituals and practices too, okay, and it is against blind faith too. So you can use the idea of Atta Dipo Bhava. Then he talks about concepts like Saubhrattatva and Samanvaya. Both of them, they mean that fraternity and tolerance, okay, in today's world when there is communalism, caste-based violence, these kind of problems are there in society. His ideas of Saubhrattatva and Samanvaya, they are very important. Then the last one is Ahimsa. Okay, Ahimsa is very important value of Buddhism. Okay, and this principle of Ahimsa we can use for avoidance of war. Okay, in cases of terrorism, in order to build inter-country amity. Okay, inter-country amity, just like the Panchshil, okay, between India and China. So all of these things you can write. Even you can invoke the Panchshila also. Panchshila is based on the Buddhist principles between India and China. So all of these ideas like Shila, Trishna, Atta Dipo Bhava, Saubhrattatva, Samanvaya, Ahimsa, Madhyamika Marga and Panchshila you can use in your answer and use them. Okay, my suggestion is don't just enumerate Buddha's ideas. So what he's saying is why most relevant for today, and why are they relevant for today? Because of the problems which are present in current day society. Okay, the problems, they can range from communalism to patriarchy, to war, okay, to mental health problems, to, okay, there are many kinds of problems. So all of these problems I have enumerated, and the relevant Buddhist ideas I have given, okay, and I have deliberately used some Sanskrit terms and Pali terms in order to enrich the answer further. Okay, this way if you write, it would be a very, very good answer, and in conclusion finally you can say that, see, the preachings of Buddha are timeless. Okay, it means that they are applicable across time and space. That way you can write and finally conclude this answer. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is, okay, the next question that I am going to talk about is, the will to power exists, but it can be tamed and be guided by rationality and principles of moral duty. Examine this statement in the context of international relations is the question. So it is talking about ethics in international relations. Okay, the concept of here, there are some concepts. One is power, okay, rationality, and ethics or morality, and their interrelatedness is something which they are asking. So, and this concept of will to power, it is a very famous concept in political science and ethics too, and it was propounded by, for the first time, Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, so if you want, you can invoke Friedrich Nietzsche, who first gave this concept of will to power. So the concept of will to power is what? will to power, it places, okay, national interest at the forefront in the international relations, okay, national interest to the forefront, and the policies which pursue will to power, they are based on realism. Okay, the realist school is based on the concept of will to power. So, and in this realist concept, okay, material acquisition, okay, national interest, okay, furthering the cause of nation, and at the same time, okay, countering your enemies, okay, all of these form part of this concept of will to power, okay, will to power. So based on realism, okay, will to acquire and retain power, okay, and the best example for this will to power concept is imperialism, wherein you go and conquer the territories of different countries, you want to impose your will on various countries, okay. So all of these things you can quote, and the concept of will to power, it is based on realism, and it is quoted for the first time by Friedrich Nietzsche. Then after that, okay, if you see how this will to power has to be balanced, because international relations, they have to be conducted on the basis of realism only, and that is will to power, okay. You should make your country as powerful as possible, that is the main concept. Now, but it has to be, okay, what they are saying is it has to be tamed, okay. This will to power has to be regulated by some principles. What are these principles? First and foremost, there is rationality, then after that, moral principles. So how will you apply rationality to will to power? First and foremost, there should be a clear understanding, okay, that the rule-based international order has superiority over your interests of power. So rule-based international order, it is based on rationality, okay. Today's international institutions like UN, okay, then along with that many other organizations like WHO, along with that IMF, World Bank, all of these institutions, they try to establish a rule-based international order in order to regulate, okay, this will to power of different nations. So from the current system of anarchy, okay, in anarchical system, this power concept of power concept of will to power, it is prominent. But in case of a rule-based international order, okay, so in the transition from anarchy to rule-based international order, definitely rationality comes into picture. Then along with that, if you see other principles of rationality which can actually help in making decisions in international relations is with respect to the cost of war. Okay, the cost of war is always higher than the outcomes of power. Okay, whatever positive outcomes that you might get, the cost of war has increased significantly because of technological changes. So automatically, if you pursue will to power in unilateral fashion, then automatically the destruction cost to you will be more than, okay, the positive outcomes that can come out of power. So the best example for this is a mutually assured destruction, which is present in the nuclear doctrine, okay, which is actually the basis of nuclear doctrines in the world, okay, wherein if you use nuclear weapons, there is a possibility that your opposition also will use nuclear weapons against you. So this way you can give the example of MAD 2. Then after that, the moral duty is also, sometimes it also can help in reducing this aspect, or it can tame the will to power. How will morality help? First and foremost, okay, we have principles like right to protect and responsibility while protecting. Okay, both of these principles, they actually can help in reducing the costs of war. Okay, right to protect when there are human atrocities in any country. Okay, the UN has the right to protect the people who are suffering from these human atrocities, but at the same time, they also have the responsibility while protecting in order to reduce the costs of war. Okay, reduce the cost of war. So here, the first and foremost, the principles of moral duty like right to protect and responsibility while protecting. Then along with the concepts like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which looks at the world as one family, okay, which can reduce this concept of will to power. The exercise of this will to power, it will reduce bit if you consider everyone to be part of your family. If you don't respect, or if you don't have very strict adherence to the national boundaries, then automatically the world will become one family. Okay, there is no pursuit of this realist will to power, and this is based on the principles of idealism. If you want to write, you can write this way. Then along with that, compassionate handling of, okay, migrant population. Compassionate handling of migrant population, we have seen it in many cases, okay, wherein during the Syrian crisis, Germany was at the forefront of providing refuge to the migrants, okay, refuge to the migrants from Syria region and Middle East who are migrating in large number to Europe. So Germany was at the forefront. Definitely you can give that example, which shows that it is not just about power. International relations are not just about power. It is also about morality and rationality. Yes, definitely national interest will be at the forefront. Finally, in conclusion, you have to give a reconciliatory conclusion, because you have written all the points. Okay, now you have to write a reconciliatory conclusion wherein you can talk about what. First and foremost, you have to speak that yes, definitely international relations have to be conducted on the basis of will to power, but at the same time, the principles of morality and rationality, they also should guide international relations. This way you can write the conclusion, okay, which will be a good answer. Okay, you have given examples properly, you have elaborated upon the ideas too. Next one, the next question that I'm going to discuss is 5A. Okay, 5A is what are the main factors for gender inequality in India? Discuss the contribution of Savitribai Phule in this regard. What are the main factors for gender inequality in India is the first part of the question. So he is not asking about the manifestation of gender inequality. He is asking about the factors behind gender inequality. I think most of the students, they might get confused here. Okay, so here you can start off with the introduction with respect to gender. Okay, gender inequality is the societal inequality between sexes, okay, wherein the rights are given to men and the obligations are placed on women. Usually this is what gender inequality means. Okay, that way you can define gender inequality in the introduction. Then the factors which are leading to gender inequality in India are what? First and foremost, okay, we have to write about the historical factors. Okay, patriarchy is a system which has been established from early Vedic period too, and it is still continuing till date. Okay, till date. So patriarchy is a historical factor in India. Then after that, there are many religious factors too. Okay, Indian religious texts, they put women at a lower position. Okay, they put women at a lower position. You can take the example of anything, okay, for that matter. But if you want to be a little radical, you can take the example of Ramayana, wherein Sita was given a very bad deal in Ramayana. Yes or no? Okay, because it is all about the rights of Rama and the obligations which Sita had to face in her life. So that way you can write the example of Ramayana if you want to become too radical. Otherwise you can give that Indian Puranas also have the discrimination against women. Okay, they promote sati, all of these things you can write. Then after that you can also talk about the biological factors, which is usually a misnomer. Okay, usually it is said that the gender inequality is based on the biological factors. But there are definitely biological differences. Okay, we definitely have to agree that there are biological differences, but these differences should not become part of discrimination against women. Okay, definitely there are some biological differences, but these biological differences, they cannot be considered as the basis for inequality or unequal treatment of women. So that is how you have to write that biological factors is a misnomer. Then after that, socialization. Okay, in India, socialization system itself, okay, is based on patriarchal values. That is the reason why sometimes it is said that woman is the greatest enemy of women, because as a process of socialization, women are always, okay, as girl child, she will be taught how to behave. Okay, how to behave, and her rights and obligations will be very clearly communicated to her. So that is the reason why socialization process is one of the major factor for, okay, gender-based inequality and educational and economic inequality. So educational and economic inequality because of absence of equality in education, and economical equality. Okay, economic equality between the genders, automatically it will also lead to patriarchy. So this way you can write that all of these factors are leading to patriarchy in India, wherein historical factors, religious factors, biological factors, socialization, educational and economic inequality, all of these are factors which are contributing to gender-based inequality. Second part of the question is what? Discuss the contribution of Savitribai Phule in this regard. Okay, discuss the contribution of Savitribai Phule. What did Savitribai Phule do? Savitribai Phule, okay, she is considered, okay, but don't introduce this answer by saying that Savitribai Phule is the wife of Jyotiba Phule. Because see, again, you are bringing in the same concept of gender inequality, wherein you are attaching the identity of a woman to that of her husband. Okay, Savitribai Phule, she has to be considered as an independent personality without any attribution to her husband. So this thing you should not do ideally. Okay, but you can write about Savitribai Phule with respect to, she is the woman who started the first school for women in India in 1848. Okay, first girl child school in India, she started in Pune. And then along with that, she also promoted the ideas like widow remarriage. She started a home for destitute women, because at that point of time in Maharashtra, there were many young widows who became destitutes in their life. So she conducted this home for destitute women. Then she was also against child marriage and practices like sati. Okay, and because of all these factors, she is considered to be the first woman feminist of India. Okay, first man feminist is Raja Ram Mohan Rai. First woman feminist is, okay, in modern India, it is definitely Savitribai Phule. That way you can conclude this answer. Okay, or you can give a conclusion wherein you can talk about the way forward, wherein you can write some steps in order to bring about gender equality. Okay, gender equality, you can write about some steps, or otherwise you can conclude by saying that Savitribai Phule is one of the first feminists in India. This way you can finish this answer. This is just a 10-marker question. I think these points are more than sufficient. Then the next question that I'm going to talk about is the current internet expansion has instilled a different set of cultural values which are in conflict with the traditional values of India. In conflict with the traditional values of India. So the current internet expansion, okay, it has led to a different set of cultural values, new cultural values, okay, and old traditional cultural values. they are in conflict because of the expansion of internet. This is the essence of the question. Okay, are they in conflict? Always. Okay, there might also be some synchrony between them two, right? So definitely you have to write that. Okay, first and foremost, you have to write in introduction the concept of social change. Okay, social change is a society is a continuously societal value system is continuously changing. Okay, because of the influences of internet, media, okay, and many other factors, because of laws, regulations, many other factors cause the change in societal values and norms. Okay, that way you can introduce this question. And after that, if you see, okay, what are the traditional old values and the new values? Okay, so the first and foremost value that I'm going to talk about in the old value system is, okay, new value system is materialism. Internet is definitely promoting a lot of materialism in society, and if you compare it with the old value system is having the value of, okay, limited consumption. Limited consumption is the traditional Indian value. Okay, always if you see in your households also, your elders tend to say that don't spend too much money. Okay, consumption is not considered to be a value, but the new internet age, it has brought into the forefront the ideas of materialism. Okay, every day you'll get ads saying that, okay, buy this product in Amazon, you'll get so and so offer and stuff. So that way the old value of materialism, the old value of limited consumption, okay, it is leading to, or moderation in consumption, it has been replaced by unlimited consumption and materialism. Then the second value that is been seen in the society is the new value is self-centeredness. Okay, and the traditional value system of India is based on social consciousness. From this social consciousness, okay, wherein you are thinking about not about just yourself, but about your society, the people who are living along with you, you are thinking about them. Okay, now this is social centeredness or social consciousness is being replaced by complete individualism, and internet is promoting this self-centeredness. And the best example for this is the culture of selfies and Instagram you can talk about. Then the new value system is virtual connectedness. Okay, we have virtual connectedness. Earlier we used to have the real value of, okay, real connectedness was there in the traditional Indian value system. Okay, then next is there is a fragility of relations is the new thing. Okay, wherein the relations are very, very weak. Okay, you might have 1,000 friends on Facebook, but in reality you don't even have a single friend to talk to. So this is how fragility of relations is something which is happening. Then along with that, desperation for positive results, okay, which is also known as FOMO. Okay, FOMO or fear of missing out. This is a major problem of the youth anxiety today. Okay, which is fear of missing out from others. Okay, you want to look cool. Okay, this is one thing that is there. And desperation for positive results is seen now, but earlier it was not there. Then we also see eccentric behavior. Okay, a lot of eccentric behavior is also attributed to the expansion of internet into rural areas. Earlier, the socialization process was very strict. That's the reason why all these kind of eccentric behaviors, they were cut down. But today, the challenges like Blue Whale Challenge, they are coming into the picture. Okay, all of these things are a emanation of internet age in the modern times, and there is mindless imitation too. Okay, earlier every individual used to have his own unique identity, but today the problem is that with the expansion of this TikTok culture, our next generation is being influenced by this TikTok. Okay, wherein TikTok is just mere imitation. Okay, mere imitation. This way, the traditional value system. Okay, the traditional value system is in conflict with the new value system which is coming from internet. Okay, this way you can write n number of examples in the conflict. Okay, but can you say that everything is in conflict? Okay, we cannot actually say that everything is in conflict. Okay, today you can see that there is proliferation of, okay, bhakti channels. Okay, on internet. Definitely it reconfirms the cultural traditional values of India. Okay, if you see on internet, there is proliferation of bhakti TVs, okay, bhakti channels, bhakti podcasts. Okay, all of these things are present on internet. Then along with that, okay, the traditional cuisine of India, that is also getting a new life because of internet. Then along with the practices like yoga. Okay, all of these things you can write in order to prove that yes, definitely internet, sometimes it is not in conflict, but it is strengthening the traditional value system of India. That way you can write the second facet of the answer, and finally in conclusion you can say that, okay, definitely there seems to be, okay, in some areas there is definitely conflict, in other areas there is reaffirmation of traditional values by expansion of internet. So it is not very unilateral. Okay, the impact is in fact, okay, a multi-pronged impact is being seen on the traditional rural values or the traditional Indian values because of the impact of internet. Okay, that way if you bring in a nuance or a complexity in your conclusion, that would be good. Okay, so this finishes the discussion on 5B. Next question that I'm going to talk about is what? Okay, Condemn none. If you can stretch a helping hand, do so. If not, fold your hands, bless your brothers, and let them go their own way. Swami Vivekananda's quote they have given. Okay, here this question, it is talking about what? It is talking about, okay, the main values which are being discussed here is the value of leadership. Okay, the value of leadership, okay, and absence of, okay, absence of coercion. Usually condemnation means coercion. Okay, this is also absence of coercion or non-violence, and leadership are the central values which are being talked about here in the introduction, wherein he is talking about what? You should not condemn any person. Okay, if possible for you, okay, give a stretching helping hand to him. If not, fold your hands and bless them for positive results and get out of the system. Okay, that way it is talking about the ideas like leadership, okay, absence of coercion, and along with that it is also concerned with empowerment of the people. So these are the three things which are being discussed in the quote. Okay, so in this fashion, in the introduction itself, you have to identify, okay, what is the meaning of the quote. Okay, it is talking about leadership, then along with that absence of coercion and empowerment. That way in introduction itself you can actually communicate it to the examiner that you have understood the concept. Then after that you can go to the example. Okay, you can go to the example based elaboration of these things. Okay, why should we not condemn anyone? Okay, why should we not condemn anyone? Because, okay, what you consider good for any person may not be considered as good for other persons. Okay, the best example for this is everyone has their own path. You should not condemn any one path and say that whatever you have given as a suggestion, it is superior. So everyone has their own path or progress method. So that way you have to write that. Okay, then every person has a individualism and unique soul. So you should not condemn anyone. You should give the necessary respect for the decision of others. That way you can write. Okay, and the other person, if he commits mistakes, okay, then he has the free will to commit mistakes. It is not that he has to follow whatever you have said. Okay, it is against, see, not, if you should not condemn anyone, it is against authoritarianism. Or coercion. Okay, so the first part you have to write this way. Then second part is helping hands. Okay, helping hands is, see, if someone is taking a path, okay, which is different from whatever you have suggested, there also you should give a helping hand. Okay, how will you give helping hand? Okay, here Swami Vivekananda's ideas only better than praying lips. Okay, helping hands always are better than praying lips. Then along with that you can give hand holding and altruism. Okay, even though the person is taking a different path from the one that you have suggested, there also you should try to help him. Okay, because you should try to do the best that you can for another person. So that way you can write helping hands are better. Then along with that, if they do not take the path that you have suggested, then you have to bless them. If you are not able to help them, then you have to bless them, which is talking about well-wishing, hope to get good results, and encouraging attitude. Okay, all of these characters, they are part of leadership. Okay, they are part of leadership wherein, okay, a leader tries to first, okay, suggest some things. If the person, if he listens to whatever the leader is telling, he'll try to extend a helping hand. Okay, if this helping hand is not taken, okay, then the leader, he will not try to condemn the person, but he tries to, okay, pray for the positive results of other person. So this way leadership qualities also can be discussed, and the best example, okay, through which you can elaborate upon this is India-Nepal relation. So what we did is in India-Nepal relation, we tried to help them. Okay, you can take the example of the earthquake in Nepal in 2015. India gave a lot of developmental aid to Nepal. Then after that, Nepal is going into the sphere of influence of China. But now we are not trying to condemn Nepal at any point of time. What we are trying to do is we are praying that Nepal is going to be a better nation. Even though it is going into the sphere of influence of China, we are not interfering in the internal affairs of Nepal. That itself shows the leadership quality of India, and it is moving away from its earlier big brother attitude. Through this example, you can definitely prove that, okay, this way it is showing leadership and absence of coercion, and we are trying to empower Nepal as much as possible. All of these factors you can write, and then you can conclude this answer. This way you can handle this question. Okay, that's it from me. Okay, and the discussion will be continued by Ayush sir.
Yes, thank you, Umesh sir. So today, now we'll be going to question number 4A. So 4A question talks about differentiate between laws and rules. Discuss the role of ethics in formulating them. So first of all, let's understand what is ethics, what is law, and what is rules. So first of all, if we see the broader spectrum, if we have ethics here, then we have law, then we have rules. So if we see ethics as a broader dimension, then comes law, then come the rules to follow the law. So let's understand what the question is asking and what is the role of ethics, what is the role of law, what is the role of rules. So first of all, laws are usually derived from the constitution. See, usually we have laws are written documents or they are written somewhere. So laws are generally in written form. They might be in an unwritten form. For example, in UK you have unwritten constitution, but they are based on some historical conventions. Therefore, laws are somewhat written or unwritten, but usually part of constitution and are made by a legitimate authority. See here, we say constitution making body, or in UK we say the Supreme Court or the laws in Parliament. Whereas rules are meant for implementing the law. So basically, laws are the statute and rules are to implement that statute. So that's a major difference. Secondly, laws are generally strict in nature, whereas laws are defined by some form of coercion. Coercion, that is punishment or reward, but rules don't follow any such penalty. So there may not be any penalty for breaking the rule. But you break the rule and that's why some law will punish you. For example, the IPC will punish you. Why? Because the law says this way. If you break the rule, what is the penalty? That will be defined by the law. Then rules can also be made by families, clubs and associations, whereas rules, or what we say, laws are in the domain of state and institutions. So laws are generally made by the state or institutions. Then lastly, laws should follow due process. That's why we use the phrase due process of law. Due process of law. Why? Because laws are taking into consideration various rules, various societal matters, various conventions of the state, various conventions of society, etc. Whereas rules can be made as a means of delegated legislation, just to implement that law, that what is hampering it. So rules can be maneuvered so that law is implemented properly. Now coming to the second part of the question, discuss the role of ethics in formulating them. So what is the role of ethics? What is the role of ethics? First of all, ethics is an embodiment of natural law. What is natural law? Natural law is what? It is about life, liberty and property. So that is what we say natural law. So man existed in society. As we said, John Locke, Rousseau and Hegel, he suggested that man exists in society, that is because of natural law. That is life, liberty and property. So laws exist to protect a man's life, liberty and property. Whereas rules are what is the maximum limit of freedoms within the domain of life, liberty, property. Then ethics is a social construct, whereas law is a legal construct. Because without law also there are some ethics. For example, we know about wheel of ignorance. We know about others regarding and self-regarding principle. For example, rules, we have a general rule that we should not play loud music, we should not smoke in public. But however, there is legality to it when we have a law against smoking in public, when we have a law against making noise after 10 o'clock. So there is a law and there is a societal ethics. So generally, law will reaffirm the societal ethics. Then law is legitimate, whereas it is based on socially acceptable ethics. See, that's what we said. For example, smoking in public should be banned. That should be a law. So it is backed by socially acceptable principles. That is what we say. Role of ethics is very important in formulating the laws. For example, if we look at the Good Samaritan law, for example, before what used to happen? By helping somebody in an accident, the person who's helping also came into question. So he came into trouble. But now because it was not socially acceptable, there was a Good Samaritan law to help accident victims. So this way you can conclude the answer by giving appropriate examples, distinction between laws and rules, and giving an overall framework where ethics is a broad framework, where laws are based on societal ethics and rules are meant for implementation of the law. Implementation of the law. Now coming to the next question. Next question is about a positive attitude is considered to be an essential characteristic of a civil servant who is often required to function under extreme stress. So first of all, here keyword is positive attitude. Then of a civil servant who is often under extreme stress. then what contributes to the positive attitude in a person? So there are 2 or 3 parts to this question. So first of all, what is positive attitude? So what is positive attitude? First of all, it is about being optimistic. It is about interactions. And it is also about yourself. For example, you should be optimistic about what is the future. You should be optimistic about the way you interact. For example, you should not have negative feelings towards others. So you should have a positive attitude. You should have an acceptable attitude towards others. Then you should be always feeling positive about yourself. You should have self-confidence. Self-confidence in oneself to achieve goals in life. Then it is also about people with positive attitude can remain hopeful. So it is about ability to garner mental strength. Sometimes we use the word aura also. Aura. Why aura? Because that is a positive attitude which brings aura in a person to achieve great things. Right? So that is what keeps you afloat. Keeps you afloat in difficult situations. Difficult situations. Now, what are the attributes of positive attitude? So this is the first part. First is the positive outlook towards the society, that you should be positive about, that you should be able to bring change, or as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Then it is about administrative theism. What is administrative theism means here? That the principles in administration should be taken as godliness or akin to God or as a service to God. Then it is about knowing the philosophy from services and organizations. For example, when we know about the good things which organizations do, for example, DMRC performs on time. So I'm positive that I'll complete the project on time. Then it comes from sense of service, sense of duty, or intent towards ends. That is, that should I be able to achieve this target or not? Then it also keeps away from negativity. For example, being positive is also about keeping negativity away by bringing positive thoughts. And sometimes in the morning we have yoga sessions and we listen to music. All those things are helping us negate negativity. Then it is also about self-awareness and self-regulation, which guides us away from negative attitudes. So all these are attributes of positive attitude. So combined, we have 2 parts of the question. First is, what is positive attitude? How is it helpful? It is helpful by being optimistic. Interactions, it is helping you remain useful and hopeful. And also these are the attributes of a positive attitude. Now coming to the next question. Next question we'll be discussing 6B. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Now this was a quote by Gandhi. See, basically he said that there's a lot of trauma in public life. There's a trauma in the world. And there are a lot of problems in the world. Problems. And that is with self, family, religion, society, etc. So the best way to solve or get away from these problems is what? To do something, to be a part of the system. And how to lose oneself? In the service of others. In the service of others. For example, sometimes we are consuming food in a langar and sometimes we are serving food. And often in Hindi we say, jitna khilane mein maza hai, utna khane mein nahi hai. That means that once you start serving people, you get a inner peace, you get a feeling of belonging to society, you get a feeling of positivity. So that is what the statement indirectly means. So how do you rationalize it in your answer? First is, it is about empathy and solidarity with oneself and others, which is different from self-centered definition of oneself. For example, even after, when you are in depression, even after shopping too much, you still don't feel good. You are still in a bad mood. Why? Because you have not served the society well. You have not had a positive outlook towards others. You are very self-centered. Then it is also about Jan Seva and Janardhan Seva, which is service to humanity. Service to humanity. So this will bring inner peace. Then it is also about work is worship. What we say, Karma Marga, or from Bhagavad Gita we say from the teachings of Lord Krishna. So it is about mental peace, that you have given your best, you have tried your best, you have tried to rectify situations, you have tried to help others, and that is why many people shift to philanthropy. And also at later stages of life, people start thinking about others' welfare over their own. Why? Because they want to service humanity, and that is the easiest way to achieve peace and harmony in your life. Then we can take the example of T.S.R. Subramaniam, who is the embodiment of this principle of losing once yourself to the service of humanity or service of India. So that is a good example you can take. Then, for example, if success is defined in unilateral fashion, acquiring money, for example, or power, so that will lead to futile. It is just a transactional thing, but not a transformational thing. So it is just centered through transactions, but not transformation. So bringing transformation is the aim of every human being. And that's why we say human beings are different from other beings. Why? Because of our sense of service, our sense of innovation, and our sense of service or growth towards others. Growth towards others. Then we can also compare Aurangzeb and Akbar, where Aurangzeb was more of self-centered being and Akbar was a service-oriented king. So he tried to reform religion, he tried to do good for society, whereas Aurangzeb was very self-centered about his own things or about his own religion. So therefore there was more intolerance during Aurangzeb regime and more tolerance during Akbar's regime. Then also we can talk about defense personnel, social workers like Ela Bhatt, who started the SHG campaign or microfinance in India. So all these people had good harmony with each other, good harmony with society, good name, and also they were having peace amongst themselves and they were proud of themselves. Why? Because they were sticking to the saying by Gandhiji, that is the best way to find yourself, is to lose yourself in the service of others. Now coming to the last question. The last question is the system of morality which is based on the relative emotional values. So here first keyword is morality, then it is about emotional values, is a mere illusion. So here, how is it a mere illusion? A thoroughly vulgar conception, so vulgar conception, and also there is nothing sound in it and nothing true. So this idea, the whole question is based on the concept of what is the idea of ethical relativism and ethical absolutism. So here we are comparing our ethics with others, and here it is about what is oneself. What is oneself? So when you hear about totalitarian regimes, when you hear about Hitler, so it is about what am I? Am I superior to others? That is what we say relativism. But that does not lead to peace. That always leads to conflict. Whereas what are we having today? So that gives rise to improvement. Improvement, right? So when we compare with others, so that is not morality, that's a fake morality. That is just a mobilization tool used by the nationalist agendas or other agendas. So what is it about? Ethical relativism gives scope to cultural values, social differences. Like for example, abortion may be ethical in few nations but may not be ethical in other nations. Then it is also about death penalty. Death penalty may be accepted in few countries but may not be accepted in other countries. But some people may hail death penalty, some people might be against it. So it will always give rise to differences. Whereas absolutism is based on universal value system and holds true across time and space. For example, murder is considered to be a sin in all cultures. So absolute values will help to self-improve, to build your consciousness. Then it is also about relativism is not in conjunction with virtue of ethics of Socrates, which are based on rational absolute value. See here, what does Socrates say? That if I am rational, I don't need to be afraid. My value system will remain intact. And for example, if corruption is a socially acceptable fact, however, it is a morally wrong thing. So that is what brings the difference between vulgarity, illusion, system of morality. So I know we are morally saying corruption is bad, but still it exists, because if you act too morally, it is a vulgar thing. It does not exist in the real sense. Then euthanasia is a morally acceptable for some, but unacceptable for others. So again, we have one more example like abortion, death penalty, where euthanasia may be acceptable for some people and may not be acceptable in some societies. Then finally, in conclusion, when we can say that what is commitment to duty, universal value, there should be consistency of values. So here the key word is consistency of value system. Consistency of value system and accommodation of relative ethical practices. That is, your relative ethical practices should be in line with your absolute value. That means society and individual should somewhere be in harmony with each other. So that will build up the relationship, that will stabilize society, give impediment to growth instead of conflict. And lastly, you can take an example from civil services, which is if you're an administrator and you're appointed as a livestock officer, but you may be a staunch vegetarian, but you have to promote poultry products. So again, one is sense of duty, and one is sense of service, and one is your individual. So sometimes they might be in conflict, but again, you have to see the morality, you have to see the illusion, and you have to see the vulgar conception here. Why? Because you may be a staunch vegetarian, but it is in the state interest or broader interest of society. So that is what we said. Others regarding versus your self-regarding principles. Self-regarding principles should be in harmony. And sometimes you might feel problematic in doing this duty, although it is in the larger interest of the state. Thank you.